Right, Cheng-Wen, I think we're going to get started because I'm not seeing any more people coming in at this stage, and it's 3 minutes past. We have quite a bit to get through today with the assignments tool. And we are recording as well, so I think we can get started. Right, let me just introduce myself and then I'll hand over to Cheng-Wen. So I'm going to put my camera on temporarily, just so that you can see me. So welcome UCT colleagues to this webinar about assignments, where we're going to have a look at the assignments tool within the Brightspace environment. And I will be taking you through these steps. And my name is Cath, and I'm a consultant working with SILT. And I have my colleague with me here in the room, Cheng-Wen. Would you like to introduce yourself, Cheng-Wen?
Morning, everyone. So I work in the academic staff development team. So I'm here with Cath, but she'll take you through the webinar. And Max is also joining us here under the SILT logo. So thank you for joining us, and hopefully it'll be useful for you. Thanks. Over to you, Cath.
Thanks, Cheng-Wen. Right, so I am going to follow suit, and I'm going to put my camera off at this stage so we can focus on the slides. And if you have any questions as we are going through, please feel free to either use the raised hand icon if you'd like to speak, or if you'd like to put your question into the text chat area, if you just prefix it with a Q, then we know that it's a question to address, but you're welcome to also use the text chat area for any other comments that you would like to put in there as well. So please feel free to use either of those channels as we go along, and we will try and address your questions as we go through. So the assignments tool in Brightspace, just to let you know, we are giving you this kind of disclaimer up front that these slides that we're showing you at the moment, they are sort of constantly being updated and they're under review because we are refining our training and improving our understanding of the platform as we go along. Also, as I'm sure a lot of you will know, that they are still small things being refined within the Brightspace environment itself. So the slides represent as it is at the moment. And seeing as we're actually dealing with the assignment tool, there's probably less likely functionality to change slightly within a tool, but the tweaks and the slight changes that you might see would be more on the sort of the user interface side of things, where you potentially might see a menu item changing its name or moving its position on the nav bar. But just to let you know that things are still a little in flux. So if things change, then we will update these slides accordingly, because we will give you the link to these slides later on so that you can actually use these as a resource as well. So what we'll be touching on in this webinar today, well, we'll definitely be looking at how to create a new assignment, but we'll also look at how to create assignment categories. Within a new assignment, there's 3 quite distinct areas that we're going to take a look at, which is availability, dates, and conditions. We're going to look at submission and completion, and then evaluation and feedback. We'll also look at some of the action menu options that are available at the high level, which govern all assignments, and the action menu options which are assigned to a individual assignment. And we also take a look at the annotation tool, which is actually a really useful and nice way of being able to give feedback to students. Right, so what does the assignment tool allow you to do? Well, effectively, it allows you to create and edit assignments as you would expect. It allows you to view submissions on the submission page from the students. It also allows you to control the access to assignments by date and time, or by group membership, or even special access permissions. And it also allows you to associate assignments to rubrics. So rubrics can be used as a mode of evaluation. But just to let you know that rubrics will actually be its own webinar. So we'll be talking a lot more in depth about rubrics at another stage, but we'll just mention it here. And you'll also be able to look at returning submissions with grades, audio, video, and annotated feedback. So that's a really nice array of options for giving feedback to students in various different types, and also how to download submissions. So I mentioned that the rubrics particularly will be looked at another webinar, and just so that you know, while we go through this webinar, it will have links to other elements that we will be touching on in a much more in-depth way. So some of the items within this webinar may be sort of touched on at a very high level, and then the more in-depth webinar will actually happen at a later stage. Right, so moving on, I'm just going to check in with everyone here in the room. Is there anybody here, if they can just raise their hand, who has not yet been able to access or log into Brightspace? So I just want to make sure that everybody has been able to access Brightspace and they are able to log in successfully. So if there's anybody that has experienced a challenge in that regard, you can just either put it in the text chat or raise your hand. Right, not seeing anything at the moment, so that's good news. So it looks like everybody's able to access Brightspace successfully. So you'll all be very familiar with this slide because this is the landing page when you actually get to the URL where Brightspace is located, which is uct.brightspace.com, and using the UCT login button to actually access and jump right into Brightspace. Right, so it looks like everyone has successfully been able to do that. So the next page would also be very familiar to you. So once you are inside the Brightspace environment, then you will see this home page, as we're calling it. So obviously your home page might look slightly different to somebody else's home page, depending on which courses you have been assigned to. So where the highlighted area is my courses, you may have a different selection of courses there, but that is where all, well, not all of them, most of the courses are located that you have been assigned to. If you wanted a full comprehensive list of all the courses which you had access to or you had been assigned to, you could use what we call, some people call it the waffle icon because it looks slightly like a waffle at the top, but it's actually the course selector icon, and that is where you would find the comprehensive list of all the courses that you've been assigned to. So you can either use the course selector or waffle icon, or you can use the visual my courses on the UCT homepage to actually jump into your course. So we are going to pretend that we are jumping into a course now, and we would have selected either the icon or a course from the list. And this is what it would look like when you arrive within your course area, all right? So this is your course homepage, and you will see a nav bar at the top, and you might see a different banner because everybody has different visual elements on their course homepage. But to access the assignments, there's actually two places to get to it. So the easiest place to get to it would be under activities, the drop-down menu under activities, and then choosing the first option, which is assignments. But there's also another way to get to it as well. A very useful icon to know about on the nav bar is this option called Manage Course. And under Manage Course, you will see an option there called Course Admin. And I'm just telling you about this. I'm sure you probably already know this, but under Course Admin, that is a space where you can actually find access to all of the tools that are aligned to your particular course. So two ways to get to assignments: directly from the activities drop-down, or go via Manage Course, Course Admin to see the full range of all the tools aligned to your course. Right, on the next slide, you will see here that we have, it's a sort of a diagram showing the assignment, what I call the assignment life cycle. So basically, when you're creating an assignment, you are going to sort of start at the beginning thinking about composing your assignment. And that's where you're going to put all the elements together to actually create your assignment. So this will be things like the title, what you're going to call your assignment, instructions to your students, any attachments that you would like to add on to your assignment. Those are all elements that you would need to actually compose or create your assignment from the start. Then you would actually think about managing the availability. So when do you want to start? When do you want to end? When you would like the due date to be? If you have any kind of release conditions that you would like to attach to this assignment, and any special access. So remember that special access is for those students who may need to access the assignment on a different date for some reason, or maybe they have extra time allocated to them. So any student that would need to have access to the assignment outside of the basic parameters that you'd already assigned to that assignment. And then you would think about collecting the submissions. So this is where you think about your assignment. Is this going to be for individuals one by one, or am I going to make this a group assignment? And then what kind of submissions would you like? Would you like inline submission? So inline, remember, it's the same as a Vula. It means that they're actually typing into the interface. Would you like a file upload? Would it be a paper submission, or would it be observed in person? And then deciding if you would like to have a single submission or if you would like to have multiple submissions. And then once your assignment is up and running, thinking about evaluating the submissions. So would you like to assign points to this, or is it going to be ungraded? Would you like your points to feed straight into grades? They call it grades within Brightspace, but that's essentially the same as grade book within Vula. Would you like to attach a rubric to this? And would you like anonymous marking? So those are all additional settings that you can actually put onto your assignment. And then once your assignment has been completed by your students, this is where you start thinking about providing feedback to them on their submissions. And this is where you can use the very nice annotation tool to do that. You can add general feedback, you can add video feedback, and even audio feedback. And you can also email users that have no submissions. That's a very handy way to remind people that they're overdue with their submission, and decide when you would like to publish the feedback. And then finally, something which we're not going to touch on at this stage, but just so that you know, there is an option to kind of go beyond that and take the submissions and actually make them available in some kind of portfolio or a place where students can collect together evidence of work that they've actually done within the course site. So this is just a kind of a high-level overview of kind of the thought process and the steps that you might take when actually setting up an assignment. Right, now the first thing we're going to take a look at, and it might be slightly counterintuitive, but we're going to have a look at assignment categories. And I know this is kind of a useful thing, and some people actually mentioned this within Vula, that they would really like a way to group all of their assignments, because sometimes after setting up quite a few assignments, it can be difficult to actually find the last one that you were working on. So categories provide a way to actually sort and filter your assignments that you're creating. It's completely optional. You don't have to set up categories. So on the next slide, you'll see that when you arrive on the assignment page, you have a button there called Edit Categories. So that in itself is also slightly counterintuitive, because it kind of implies that you have categories already and you are wanting to edit them. But what it actually means is this is where you're actually going to start creating your categories. So as I said, it's completely optional, but it's just a way where you can sort your assignments as you're going along. So to create categories, what you would do is click on that button that says Edit Categories. So once you click on Edit Categories, you'll come onto the Edit Categories page, and now you will see the Add Category button. So this is very easy at this step. It's very intuitive from this point on. By just clicking on the Add Category button, you'll get a little pop-up window that says create category. So you can add a name in for your category. And if afterwards you decide that you maybe want to slightly change your category names, that's perfectly fine. It's not cast in stone. So you can actually just create categories and then subsequently go and edit them. So you could maybe create categories like, say you had weekly assignments. Maybe you would want to create categories that were like week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. You would type in the name there and just click the create button. So this is pretty easy to create categories. And as I said, you can always come back and change categories afterwards if you want to. So on the next slide, you will see there that you can actually come in and edit your categories. So here you can see I just created week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as categories. So on the sort order, you can change the order just by clicking the upward or downward arrow. So that just sorts your categories ascending or descending. You can also use the in use column. If you see a tick in the in use column, that means that category already has an assignment within that category. So the category effectively is in use. You can also use this area if you wanted to delete certain categories. You could use the check boxes on the left and then use the little bin or delete icon at the top. And this is, of course, the edit category that you page that you were on earlier. So if you decide you now want to add another category, you can also do that from the button over here. So categories are just a way, as I said, it's very optional. You don't have to do it at all, but it does provide a nice visual distinction, especially if you start getting a lot of assignments over time. Right, I'm just going to pause at this point and just check if there are any questions, or you're welcome to switch on your mic or raise your hand or enter into the text chat. Any questions at this point before we jump into actually creating a new assignment? Right, not seeing any raised hands at this time. So let's move on to actually creating a new assignment. So this is the main part where you'll actually be setting up an assignment from scratch. So let's jump on in and see how to do that. Right, so on this page here, this is where you'd be creating your new assignment. So the new assignment button is highlighted and it's pretty bold on this page. And this is where you would go ahead and start creating your new assignment. So let's click on new assignment, and on the next slide, you'll see the elements that will appear. Now this looks pretty busy. And the reason is that there's some very important areas laid out here. And if you're very used to creating assignments in Vula, probably one of your top priorities is wanting to know where can you do the things that you used to do in Vula? Where are those things located now? So let's run through some of the very important elements that you will see on this new assignment page that's presented to you. So right at the top there is the title in the blue outline. So that is where you would give your assignment a title. And just to note also that once things have been created, there is the option to actually come back and edit or change some of these things. So the title is one of the things that you can come back and change if you want to slightly refine it afterwards. But obviously its title, as you can see, is one of the mandatory fields. So you have to give your assignment a title. The next thing you can see below that in the green outline is the grading. So there's various different grading options that we talked about, and we'll take a look at those a bit more in depth in a little while. But this is where you'd be sorting out your grading options. Then below that in the orange box, that is where the instructions will be given. And as you can see, there's a rich text editor there. So if you wanted to be adding things like colorful headings or links or maybe even images, this is where you would add that in here in the rich text editor where the instructions are put. And then the next area below that is the pink outline. And this is where you'd be adding any attachments that you wanted to make available to your students for the assignment. So you might be adding, say, a journal article or a resource document. This is where you would add the attachments, and we're going to take a little bit more in-depth look at that in a minute. And at the bottom, at the very bottom, it's quite an important area because this is where you would be saving as you're going along. So save button saves up until that point. Save and close would mean that you, exactly as it says, would be saving it and closing, going out of this editing screen. And on the right-hand side there, you can see visibility. So this is very similar to Vula drafts, where you would be working on something behind the scenes, but you didn't want to make it visible to students as yet. So this is where you could set the visibility. It's a little toggle button. So you can see at the moment with the icon with the slash through it, looks like a little eye. That's very similar to what we had in Vula. So at the moment, this is not visible to students, but if you wanted to make it visible, you would just slide the toggle button and make it visible to students. And as I mentioned before, there are sometimes many places to do the same action. This is one of the spaces where you could actually set the visibility of the assignment using this toggle button. And then on the right-hand side, we have a panel which is highlighted in red. So we have three very important areas in this panel on the right, and this is where all your assignment settings are going to take place. So the first one pertains to availability, dates, and conditions. And the second one is submissions and completion. And the third one is evaluation and feedback. So you'll see at the moment, each of those three areas is actually in the collapsed state. So you can't see the elements below it. We are going to look at each of those in depth in a little while. So each of those sections actually expands to reveal far more settings, but that is where all of your assignment settings will be accessed in that panel on the right-hand side. Right, on the next slide, we mentioned that we would take a bit more in-depth look at grading options. So for the grading options, you can have ungraded, you can have points, which you can send through to the grade book, or you can have points which are not in the grade book. They don't have to be in the grade book, or you can reset it to ungraded. So you can have points or no points, and they can go to the grade book or not in the grade book. So this is where you set those options on the drop-down list there. And you can see on the left, you can decide how many points you would like to be this assignment to be out of, and you literally just type in the number over there. So this is where you set the grading and the options on the drop-down list. And this is fairly intuitive to actually set the grading for an assignment.
Do we have a question in the chat or something?
Yes, we do. It says, will it become visible automatically at the availability start date? So as far as I know, no, it won't. You do need to set the visibility. So if it is not set to visible, i.e. it's hidden, and the start date arrives, as far as I know, it stays in that place, in that hidden state until you actually make it visible. So think of the visibility almost like the equivalent of draft state in Vula. So if in the Vula context, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, if you were still working with something in draft and it came to the date, I don't think it clicks it over automatically. You need to pull it out of the draft state. So think of it as almost being still in the editing state. Thanks, Cheng-Wen. Right, so that's the grading, and very easy to set that grading. And the next thing we're going to take a look at are the attachment options, because there's quite a few options to provide attachments to students when you are setting an assignment for them. So which options are available? Let's have a look. So we have just below the area where you would put your instructions, that is the area where you can choose to add your attachments. So we have a file upload option. You can add a link to an existing activity, but as the name implies, you must have already created something else within your course that you would like to link to. You can attach a web link. So a web link literally means any URL that you would like to link out to. It could be a website, it could be a PDF document that's available on someone's site. So any kind of external URL link could be added here as well. And a really nice option is you can also record audio and record video for the students to see. So that's quite a nice addition. And you can see you have quite a few options to actually add attachments to supplement the assignment information. Now let's have a look at each of these quite briefly, but just so that you get an idea what is available to you for each of these options. So the first one we're going to take a look at is the file upload. That's the first icon there. So when you are uploading a file, it will pop up a little screen that says add a file, where you can choose from your computer or from the course offering files. The course offering files, if you want to equate that to Vulo again, would be like choosing something that you'd already put into the resources, or a video note. So I would assume that most people would probably be choosing from the first two, and maybe the My Computer as being the primary source of uploading a file. And if you choose My Computer, then you can add a file where you can actually browse your computer, grab the file and add it here. Just to note there that it says that you can upload files to a maximum of 2 gigs. So the 2 gig restriction is a single upload. So if you had, for example, a really large video file that was great, that you really wanted to attach, that was greater than 2 gigs, it wouldn't upload. But then I know that a lot of you would already be very cognizant of the fact of adding too many files and resources onto the assignment. Everything adds extra data charges. So I'm pretty sure nobody would be adding a 2 gig file, but just to know, it's good to know that that restriction is there. One more question in the chat here. We have, how do those links differ from the quick links in the rich text editor? Okay, Richard, are you meaning the links for adding the attachments? How are they different from the ones in the that are available at the top there? You can see just above where you add in the instructions.
Yes, I mean, in the instructions, in the rich text editor under instructions, there's the 2 buttons, the one for add stuff and the other for add quick links.
Correct. Yes. So they are. So some of these would be similar to that. For example, a link to an existing activity. It would take you to the same place. But the one in the rich text editor, you could effectively almost put a hyperlink on, say, for example, in the text within the inline instructions, and that would flip you through to the using an existing activity as an example here. Whereas the link at the bottom would go to the same destination, but it wouldn't be added within the text in the instructions, and it would appear as like a single link listed below the instructions. So the destination would be the same, the presentation would be slightly different.
Thank you.
Right, thanks for that question, Richard. Right, so you can upload your files there from your computer or other places, and just to be aware of the 2 gig restriction. And then another option moving on from there is you can add a link to an existing activity. Obviously, as we said, as the name implies, this must be something that's already existing within the course structure. So if you had something that this assignment was particularly referring to, or maybe you would like to make a link to something that you've already mentioned in the course site that was going to be used as a resource for this particular assignment, this is where you could add the link here. And once you clicked on that add link to existing activity, you would be presented with this window where you would choose from the course offering of where the item would be located. So quite intuitive there, just clicking the add link to existing activity and then selecting where the existing activity was and then adding it in here. And the next option to add an attachment there is the one which we mentioned, which is the web link. So literally any URL that you would like to add here as a resource or reference, you add the URL in the top and you just add a title below that, and it would present as links below the instruction when the student was actually accessing this assignment. So that's quite an easy one to do. And then the two new ones, which are actually quite nice, is the recording audio and the recording video. So first of all, recording audio. Once you click on that link, you will get a little pop-up window that says media capture. And you can see there that it has a timer. So there is a 30-minute limit, but similar to the 2 gig file restriction size, I'm sure everybody knows that the more you speak, the longer your file, the larger your file size. So I'm pretty sure most people would not speak for 30 minutes as an attachment to an assignment, but the 30-minute limit is there. But this is really nice tool to use if you want to add some audio instructions to your assignment. You could basically record that right here within the space and it would attach to your assignment. Just note that once you started recording, because this is web-based, you would then get a secondary pop-up which would ask for access to your microphone. So you do need to allow access to your microphone so that it actually picks up your voice and creates that file and adds it as an attachment to this assignment. So that's recording audio. And then the next one beyond that is actually recording video. So very similar, except this time, because obviously it's video, you need to allow access to your microphone and your camera as well. So make sure that when you are recording video, that you don't miss these little pop-ups that will appear at the top of your screen near the URL bar in your web interface. You will see the little pop-up asking you to allow access to your microphone and to your camera. If you don't do that, then this little recording will not work. And you can see similarly here that the audio, the video and the audio both have a 30-minute timer on the recording. But as video files are even larger than audio files, I wouldn't imagine somebody recording video for 30 minutes, but it's just good to know that that constraint is there. Right, so those are the options for adding attachments. And now we are going to move on to looking at the side panel where the settings are for your assignment. Remember, there were 3 areas that we said were in that side panel. And the first one we're going to be looking at is the availability dates and conditions. Just going to check quickly if there are any more questions up until this point. Anybody that would like to raise a hand or switch on their mic, or any other questions, you're welcome to do that. Right, not seeing any questions at this stage, but you are welcome to add them into the text chat as we go along. Right, so we're going to jump straight into the next section, which is all about the availability. So this, as I said, is the first of the 3 options available on the side panel. And remember, when we first viewed them, they were in the collapsed state. So now they are expanded on the right-hand side, and you can actually see the kind of subsections that exist under availability dates and conditions. So for the dates, you can see that the due date is actually over to the left above where you would normally put the instructions. And it's very easy to set the date, very similar to Vula, that you do get the little calendar pop-up that arrives there, and you literally just need to scroll through and click on a date for the date to go into the due date field. And when you first get to the date field, as you'll see the ones on the right-hand side where it says start and end, you will see that the ones on the right don't have times next to them. So just to note that the time part next to the date only appears once you have actually added the date in. So don't get worried if you can't see the time. The time field will appear as soon as you have entered a date. So the due date, the start date, and the end date, these are pretty similar to the 3 date options that you had within Vula. So this is where you access those dates, and set those times. And the next thing below that you will have are the release conditions. Right, so release conditions, you can either create new ones or you can link to existing ones. You might have existing release conditions on some of your other content that's within your course. So you could link to those, or you could create a brand new one right here. This is not mandatory. This is an optional setting that you can put if you want to put this in kind of a flow of events and you wanted to make sure that students had done a particular task before allowing them access to this particular assignment. This is where you would use a release condition to actually help them navigate to this point. So if you wanted to create a new release condition, you would click on Add Release Condition and select Create New. And when you did that, you would get the little pop-up window that says Create a Release Condition. And then there would be a drop-down list under condition type where you would select a condition type. Now there's quite a few here. The list is actually longer than what I've shown on the screen here. But you might want to choose something, say you had it kind of linked to checklist items and you didn't want them to actually start this assignment until they had actually completed a particular checklist item, then you would choose that option from this list here so that they would only gain access to this assignment if they had actually completed the item and completed the checklist item. So this is completely optional to use release conditions and can sometimes be a little bit complex because you do need to kind of keep track of them and make sure that they actually are in a logical progression, that you're actually not blocking yourself or blocking the students from actually doing something, or set a release condition that maybe has kind of a loop that doesn't quite work. So this can work effectively, but you just need to think through it fairly logically. So we have a question here in the chat. If the due date precludes submission past that point, what does the end date do? Does it then disappear? Can one leave the end date blank? Yes. Okay, so quite a few questions there, Stefan. You can leave the end date blank. That means it's kind of open forever. Your other questions around kind of due dates, start dates, end dates. Seeing here, when you say does it disappear for students, Stefan, are you meaning does the visibility on the assignments go into kind of a hidden state?
Yeah, I think that is what I meant. Or is this more like the they can still submit past the due date? It will just appear as a late submission then if it's still before the end dates.
So if you didn't have it, say for example, you didn't have an end date, that means that they could just submit whenever. If you had a start date denotes when they can actually start it and have access to it. But remember, over and above that, you've got the visibility toggle also in play. The end date, as we said, you can put it there or you can leave it off and just have it forever. The due date is the one which will kick in the late tag. So if you have a due date, anything beyond that due date will be marked as late. Trying to see what other questions did you have here. Does that kind of make sense for what you're asking?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yeah, no, that's fine. Thanks.
All right, great. And then Richard was asking, if you use rubrics, do you have to use? No, you don't have to use release conditions with rubrics. The two are not contingent on each other. Rubrics is a completely distinct method of evaluation. So you can use one without the other. So remember that release conditions, it's like a gatekeeper, if you want to think of it like that. It decides who has, it's one of the access conditions to an assignment, whereas rubrics is an evaluation mechanism, and the two are completely distinct. Great, thanks for those questions.
Thanks. I just saw that there was score and associated rubrics in the condition types. That's why I wondered.
Okay, right. All right. Yes. Yes, but you can use rubrics completely independently, and release conditions are completely optional. They're absolutely not mandatory at all. But good question. Thanks, Richard. Right, we're going to move on to the next section now, which is special access. So I'm sure some of you may have students that require special access. So this will be things where it's a different, it could even be a different date. It could even be extended time that a person has to do something. This can be, the special access can be given to individuals, and it can also be given to groups. So say, for example, you had 5 students that all had similar extra time requirements. You might want to create a group for them, because you always know that these students always have to have, say, 30 minutes extra or a day extra, whatever it may be, and you grab them in a group and assign special access to them. So the special access is at the bottom there of the availability dates and conditions, and you just have to click on the Manage Special Access button. That will pop up a little screen here, and you can see 2 options to choose from. So the first one is allow users with special access to submit outside of the normal availability dates. And the other option is allow only users with special access to see this folder. So there's deciding on how you would like to use special access. So remember, this is like almost another way of filtering students to a particular special way of accessing the assignment. So we're going to just use an example of looking at the first one, allowing a user special access outside of the normal availability dates and times. So you would click on the Add Users to Special Access. Once you'd clicked on Add Users to Special Access on the next screen, you would see this pop-up screen where you can change the dates. So where is it that they need the special access? Maybe they need an extended date at the end for submitting. So you would add that in over there, and remember to actually add the little checkbox as well to say that that is the area where the special access is required. And then the next section below that you can see is, who does this apply to? Is it going to apply to a user, or is it going to apply to a group of users? So where it says view by, that is where you could either select a single individual user or a group. And then below that, you'd be presented with a list of your students or participants on your course. And you would need to click the little checkbox next to the individual's name or the group name to actually apply that condition to that selected individual or group. And once you had done that, you could just click save. And as with everything in Brightspace, you can come back and edit things. So if somebody else needs special access or something else changes and you need to change this again, you can also edit that. So once you've clicked save, you'll see a confirmation message, and you'll see that the person or the individual or group you've assigned special access to will be listed there. And on the right-hand side, you can see in line with that listing, a little pencil icon. So this is very similar to Vula, and that is where you could actually go and edit. So if something changed and you needed to go back and refine it, you can always go back and edit it there. And the X means you can actually remove that completely and delete that special access. So that section is all pertaining to special access, and this is where you would set it within the Brightspace environment. Right, so that is all pertaining to the availability and dates and conditions. And now we're going to have a look at the second section on the right-hand panel, which is to do with submission and completion. So this is the second section on the right-hand panel. And as you can see, this is also an expanded format now. And some of the interesting things that you get under this section are the assignment types and the categories. So here we have our friend, the categories, making a reappearance. This is the first thing that we actually started off with this webinar about, is the categories. I said they were completely optional, but it's just a way of kind of filtering and sorting if you have many, many assignments. So this is where you would find that if you want to assign an assignment to a particular category. So the first thing at the top there, let's have a look at the assignment types. So we've obviously mentioned that you can have individual assignments and you can have group assignments. If you're going to select a group assignment, it means that you would have had to create these groups obviously in advance. So we're not going to cover creating groups in this webinar and using that kind of group creation tool, but you would have had to create groups in advance to assign an assignment to a group. And that's very similar to Vula. So if you created groups in that drop down, that is where you'd be able to select your group that you would like to create this assignment for. The categories, as we said, are completely optional. If you are using categories, this is a place where you could assign this assignment to a category. And again, you can always go back and remember, you can edit categories, you can add more categories, you can take categories away, and you can also take assignments and move them into categories. So if you decide that you would like to use categories subsequently, you can always do this and move things around. So that is where you can find the assignment type, individual or group, and decide if you would like to assign it to a category. And the next very important section below that is submission type. So what kind of submission would you like to accept for this particular assignment? So here the options are a file submission, a text submission, on paper, and observed in person. So the file submission, I'm sure you're all very familiar with. That's very similar to Vula, where you can, a student can upload a file for their submission. The text submission, that's another name for effectively the inline submission. So it's where the student would actually type in their answer or their submission into the rich text editor. So text submission equates to inline submission. And then the last two, on paper and observed in person, that is, they have the same settings, but that is effectively if you wanted to create a space or a digital record of an assignment where the students may actually be writing this on paper within the classroom environment, or maybe they were actually doing something practical where a lecturer was walking around and actually noting what the students have been doing, observing it in person, but you wanted there to be a digital kind of track record of it within the LMS in amongst all the other assignments. This is an option that you could use where you could have an assignment space for it, but they wouldn't be actually uploading something, but you'll be using this space to actually capture a mark or some feedback for it. So let's have a look at the first one here for a file submission, because that's one of the more regularly used ones. So for a file submission, you can also allow, it says file extensions. So here you can either have no restrictions, or you can actually put a restriction on and say, I only want, or I'm only going to accept PDF files. But what I normally recommend here is actually not to use any kind of restrictions, because as soon as you put on restrictions there, you might get students that actually don't take note of this. Try and upload something that is not within the restriction, and then that becomes like an administrative kind of extra additional task where you have lots of students saying, I'm trying to upload and it's not working. Why is it not working? So generally I leave the restrictions off completely and just leave it as no restrictions on a file upload. And then below that, you can decide if all the submissions are going to be kept, if you only want one submission allowed, or if you're going to have multiple submissions allowed, if you only want the most recent submission to be kept. So that's just to consider how many submissions you're going to allow, and if you want all of them or just one of them to be kept. And at the bottom there, you can see a notification email where you can send an email to be notified when there is an assignment submission. Got a question here in the chat. Can you set a file type? We often want students to submit a specific CAD drawing file type. Okay, so Chris, are you saying, can you kind of extend the allowable file types to actually specify a CAD drawing?
Yeah, we would actually want, because even within our CAD software, you can save your drawings in probably 50 or 60 different methods, and we only want one type. So we would say must be a SLDP file. Can you set that to only allow specific ones, or is it PDF
No, so,
or
correct, yeah.
annotatable or not?
Correct. So you wouldn't be able to add it to the drop down under restrictions. You would have to make a note of that in the instructions, and the system itself wouldn't be able to kind of filter out and only allow those kind of files.
Yeah, we do those instructions, and it seems to upset students significantly, and they can't achieve that. So
yeah,
the custom file types won't allow us to do that.
I don't think it's going to appear on the drop down there. So Aslam, I'm seeing there that you're also talking about custom file types. It's also the reason why I'm not touching on this quite at the moment is because we still kind of, certain things are in flux at the moment within Brightspace, and it's we'll have to see at the end whether who has access to actually set the custom file types. But at the moment, I would probably recommend that you include it as an instruction in the main body of the assignment. And it's probably likely, remember that everything is in flux, but it's probably likely that you would not be able to enforce it through the system that only that particular file type would be allowed to be uploaded.
Okay, can from an engineering perspective, can we ask that not be done? The ability to set custom file types is quite important, because if a student, big class, and a student submits the wrong file type, you've then got to track the student down, chase after them, and
Correct.
we use automatic marking for a lot of stuff, and that bombs it out. So these things become quite important quite quickly.
Right. So I will check up on the custom file types for you as well, and just let you know where we are with that in terms of implementing that. And thanks, Aslam, for also raising that as well. But just to also remember that things are quite a bit in flux, but it's really good to get this feedback from you to know which things are like really high priority, even if it's for, you know, a particular group of people or particular faculty. So thanks for raising that. Great, thanks for that feedback, Stefan. I'll definitely take a look and get more feedback on exactly where we are with the custom file types. Thank you. Right, we're going to move on fairly swiftly to the next part. So we talked about the different file type submissions. Remember that you can also have text submission. I'm sure this is probably less used, but as we mentioned, it is the inline submission where students would actually be editing straight into the interface and adding text straight into the interface. And you can see the similar settings there for the submissions, allowing all or one or multiple, and also having a notification email. And on the next slide, the other two options that I mentioned, they have similar settings. So observed in person and on paper submission, they have the same settings. So you can see that the settings have changed slightly, and now you only have an option to say they marked as complete when, and you can choose which option there, automatically on a due date, or automatically on evaluation, or manually by the learner. So you can see obviously the notification email and the submission settings, those don't apply in this situation, so they are not there. So you can only decide how you would like to mark this as complete within the system. So those last two options have the same settings, observed in person and on paper submission. Right, so the next slide was really just an animation of how to actually go through setting up a very basic assignment, but I'm not going to dwell too much on this slide because I am aware that we have very few minutes left in this allocated hour, and we still have a good few things to quickly go through that are quite important. So I'm going to skip over this slide and go on to the next section, which would be the third panel on the right-hand side, which is all about evaluation and feedback. So evaluation and feedback, as I mentioned, the third panel, this is where you can see it in its expanded version. And this is where you would attach something like a rubric. Remember that we will have a webinar on rubrics later on. So I'm not going to delve too much into how to actually create them or attach them, but this is where you would do it. The annotation tool, this is where you would check to say, make the annotation tool available for assessment. And the third option there is anonymous marking. You can decide whether or not you would like to hide the student names during the assessment. And the fourth option there is to do with Turnitin. And again, similarly, we will have a Turnitin webinar later on. So I'm not going to go into any of the settings here pertaining to Turnitin, but just this is the section where you would actually find those elements pertaining to evaluation and feedback. And on the next slide, you will see that we are going to quickly take a look at what we call the action menus. So within the Brightspace interface on the assignment page, there are two spaces where you can actually get to the action menu. So one of the action menus, which some people call it just a drop-down menu, but Brightspace refers to it as an action menu, would be the drop-down arrow next to more actions at the top on the buttons. And in this action menu, that is where you can find preview, reorder, and event log. Those are three we're going to have a very brief look at the moment, and the bottom three on this list I've kind of put together in one box because these ones are what they call multi-action functions. So multi-action functions mean you need to select something on the checkboxes on the left-hand side to apply any of these particular multi-action functions. So for example, if you wanted to make multiple assignments all visible to users, you would select the checkboxes on the left, then use this particular action menu and choose make visible to users, and all of those selected items would then become visible. Similarly for the hide option and the delete option. So the bottom three are all multi-action functions, but the top three we're going to have a quick look at. And the first one we're going to look at is preview. So in Vula, remember there was a preview option where you could preview each individual assignment. Here in the preview mode, you have all the assignments listed to you, and you are effectively in preview mode for any of the assignments that you've created. A good tip here is to have this checkbox ticked here where it says bypass any restrictions on submitting to assignments. So what that means is if you've put other restrictions or conditions on your assignments, you will still be able to, if you have this ticked, be able to actually go through and step through the functionality of an assignment in the preview mode. So effectively, any other restrictions that you may have put on will not apply in this preview mode. So that's very useful to have there. And the next one on the next screen, you'll see the reorder option gives you the option to reorder. Because remember when we were creating categories, I said you're always going to have an option to move things around and change things. So this is where you can reorder. If any of you have ever reordered forum topics within Vula, this kind of interface will look very similar to you, where you just order things according to numbers from the drop-down list. So here in the reorder, you can view it in expanded format or in collapsed format. At the moment, we're looking at expanded format where you can see the categories and you can see the elements within each of those categories. And on the next slide, you'll be able to see the collapsed format. So when it's collapsed, you see it at the category level. So say, for example, you only wanted to reorder your categories, it might be more easy to actually view things in the collapsed state. So you can just reorder your categories. So depending which elements you want to reorder, you may want to view it in expanded or collapsed state. Richard is asking, can you copy, reuse assignments across course sites? Okay, so Richard, if you can copy an assignment, yes. You can copy it within your own course site, obviously. You can, so a copy would then be, if you created a copy, you can pull that element across to another site. But I'm just checking with you, when you say across course sites, it would be actually another instance of that assignment across on another site. It wouldn't be one instance of the assignment where multiple sites would have access to it. That is what you are meaning, correct? a distinct instance.
It's multiple instances. It's a distinct.
Correct.
So from one year to another, or
you can copy it and then pass it across.
The first semester course, the second semester course, for example.
Yes,
yeah.
you can
Okay,
do that.
great.
Yes, you can. Thanks for that question, Richard. Right, so that's reordering your assignments within the categories. And then the third thing that I wanted to draw your attention to was the event log. So just to be aware that the event log is actually a history of all the actions that you have taken in the assignment area. So it's things that you've done. So if you've created an assignment or deleted an assignment, this is the event log of your actions. This is not the event log of submissions. That's called a submission log. So event log is your actions within the assignment area. And this is quite handy because you, as you see there, you actually have a restore button. So the restore button would be obviously if you deleted something by mistake and then subsequently you decide, oh gosh, I should have actually not deleted that. Let me get it back again. This is where you can do that. So that's a really handy option here to restore. And you can see at the top there, you can also filter the event log by created, deleted, or restored if you are looking quickly for a particular assignment. Right, so that's a brief look at the actions button for those options within assignments. And on the next slide, we'll have a look at the action menu, which is associated with a particular assignment. So I'm not going to go through all of these because a lot of them are very intuitive. For example, edit assignment would just take you back to the screen that we've looked at when we created it. We've talked about hiding from users as well. And this is another place where you can hide an assignment from a user or make it visible again. And copy assignment, that was one of the things that Richard just mentioned right now. This is where you could copy the assignment within this course and also create copies that you could actually push across to other course sites. So the three I'm just going to look at on this particular action menu is view submissions, delete assignments, and the submission log. Remember, so you had the event log, and the submission log is for where the students actually submit their things to actually see that log. So the first one, the view submissions, that's a very handy one. Obviously, as the name implies, this is where all the submissions would be. And again, there I've just highlighted the multi-action functions, which are at the top there. So if you wanted to email particular users or mark as complete or mark as incomplete or publish feedback for multiple users at once, you could use this multi-action function at the top and use the check boxes on the left-hand side to actually select which users or groups you would like to apply that multi-action function to. On the next slide, we're going to take a look at the delete option. So if you wanted to delete a particular assignment, you would check the box next to the selected assignment and then choose the delete option, and you will get this confirmation pop up to actually confirm that you really want to delete something. So don't be worried that you're going to delete something without being warned about it and delete something by mistake. And on the next slide, we'll be able to see the option for the submission log. All right, so this is where you can actually see what users have done. Again, similarly, you can sort it by event at the top there. So everything that's been submitted or deleted or restored or started, you can sort it there, or you can just view everything, in which case it'll actually just put it in chronological order. So submission log is the student's actions and event log is the lecturer's actions within the assignment area. Right, we're going to move on really swiftly to the last little bit, which is about bulk edit. So this is another very useful multi-action function. So if you click on bulk edit, the next slide will show you that on the bulk edit screen, you have options to change the categories, the titles, and the dates and times, start, end, and due for the selected assignments. So this is really handy that you can kind of do this high-level editing all in one spot for multiple assignments, the ones that you actually select. So that's the bulk edit option. And then just to let you know, on the next slide, I'm sure you would have seen a couple of icons next to the assignments. So the one with the little key, which is slanted, is if that assignment has special access. The one with the eye with the line through it indicates the visibility. So the line through means it is hidden. And the other icon there is if you've decided to associate that assignment with a gradebook item or a grade item, that is the icon you will see there. So that's just a handy indicator as to what those icons mean. Right, last thing I'm going to touch on really quickly, because I see we are a little bit over time, and thank you to all of those people who are able to stay. And we're going to look very briefly at the annotation tool, because this is actually a really nice tool. So remember this thing that we had under the evaluation and feedback panel on the right-hand side? I said we should put a check into that option there. Annotation tools, make the annotation tool available for this assessment. If you have put that tick in there, the next slide will show you the annotation tool that you'll be able to access to work on the submissions. So even if a student has not submitted a PDF, say they have uploaded a doc, that doc, when you actually use the annotation tool, will automatically be converted to a PDF, which then gives you access to all of these tools here. So you can see there's quite an assortment there of different palettes of colors and indicators. There's text that you can add on, there's icons, and then on the panel on the right-hand side, if you have used a rubric, this is where your rubric would be listed. Below that, you can see your grading. This is where you could add in grading if you wanted to. If this was a graded assignment, then you have a large area for overall feedback. Again, you've got the rich text editor there, so you can make use of colors or links or any kind of formatting to draw attention to your overall feedback. And at the bottom, you will see these familiar icons again, where you can actually attach feedback similar to the attachments that you had on the assignment to start with. So if you wanted to link to web links, or you wanted to upload a file, or you even wanted to record some audio feedback or even some video feedback, this is where you could do it. So say, for example, you wanted to just tell people via a video about their feedback on their assignment and not actually type something into the overall feedback, this is where you could do that. So this is quite a nice tool where you have multiple different ways of supplying feedback to students, and the annotations that you make on the assignment there, all of those will be visible when you publish this feedback to the student and make it available to them. They will be able to see all of these annotations that you've made on the document. And obviously, depending on what you've chosen to supply the feedback in, if it's audio, video, or text, they'll be able to see that, their grade and their marks on the rubric. Right, so that's the annotation tool. Gone through that really briefly, but we are quite pressed for time. Stefan, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, very quickly. For the video feedback, would one be able to record a screen for that? Because I imagine that that would be useful as opposed to the student seeing your face in the video feedback, but you rather sort of scrolling through it and talking them through what they could have done differently.
So when you use the video feedback within Brightspace, the default, as remember when we focus on the attachment, is that your webcam comes on and your mic comes on. So the webcam is going to, as you say, focus on you. The other way you could do it if you wanted to have video feedback, but it's a screen recording and you wanted to like walk them through something, is you could then upload that as a file. So that would be a file attachment upload. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's fine, thanks.
Perfect. Great. Right, so that was a bit of a whirlwind tour of the assignment tool. As you can see, it does hold a lot of potential and a lot of possibilities, a nice array of things that you can do, some of which you couldn't do within the Vula environment. And remember that a lot of things we went over fairly briefly because we will have more in-depth webinars about rubrics and Turnitin and some of the other things like Gradebook as well. So we did skip over that fairly briefly. Thanks very much for those who raised questions here in the chat and who's verbally asked questions. I'm just going to check in quickly before we sign off if there are any more questions at this stage about anything that we've covered today. You're welcome to switch your mic on if there's any more questions. Thanks, Cheng-Wen. Cheng-Wen has just added the link to the slides. If there's anything you would like to go back and take a look at more in depth, the link is in the text chat for you. Right, not seeing any more questions at this stage, but thanks everybody for being here today. We are slightly over time, so thank you very much for staying and for being in this webinar. We will have another webinar tomorrow. We will be dealing with quizzes. Quizzes is a two-part webinar because it's quite a big, broad area, but please feel free to join us tomorrow if you are interested in knowing more about quizzes. So thank you very much. Thank you to Cheng-Wen for driving the slides today and for adding into the text chat as well, the slide link, and fielding some of the questions. Thank you, Cheng-Wen. And thank you, everybody.